So anyways, I think what this discussion was aiming at and what this reflection can do for us tonight is show us where maybe the focus is in the story, at least for your groups or wherever maybe individuals in the group, thinking about which role you're focusing on for the actor. And maybe you got a few different reactions. I know in our group, we had some people thinking maybe the manager, others thinking one of the workers, and it depends. But regardless of which of the characters you choose or which role you choose, it will shift the focus of the movie a little bit. And this shift in attention towards one character over another would have an impact on how you would title this movie, maybe. And immediately those coming into the theater to see the movie will then have an idea of where their attention should be, right? Because if you've got a main actor, you're probably like, okay, I'm going to focus on this actor's action, what's going on around him, because chances are that's where the action's going to be. So producers and directors will use this to their advantage, maybe create subplots, cause confusion, lead viewers astray. And so maybe my previous statement should be revised. This reflection on titles doesn't show us where the focus should be, but that depending on the title, the focus will no doubt change. So getting back to the parable today, and away from these risky Hollywood business plans, titles can be deceiving. Today's parable is no different. In many Bible translations nowadays, titles are inserted into sections, and these don't occur in the original text. So they wouldn't be in the Hebrew and they wouldn't be in the Greek. But these translators today have placed them in the text in order to break up ideas and also to help organize passages. So today's parable has a title, and it's pretty much the same in all translations. So here's a photo. As you see above the 20, it's titled The Laborers, or commonly also The Workers in the Vineyard. So if we read the passage starting with this title in mind, our perspective has already been shaped. Amy Jill Levine, and I just had to include this because it was awesome, but she's self-described as a Yankee Jewish feminist who teaches in a predominantly Christian divinity school in the buckle of the Bible Belt. And I mean, it was just great. It really has nothing to do with what I'm talking about, but it was fantastic. So anyways, Levine, in her story, Short Stories by Jesus, pulls apart a few of these parables. And in her chapter on this parable in particular, she addresses this idea of misleading titles. And the problem that she says with this title is that it gives us a slant towards a particular interpretation. Both the focus on the workers and on the vineyard place the emphasis of this character and this setting closer to us, which creates a distance between us and the landowner as a character. And it also moves us away from the setting of the marketplace, which I'll get to a little bit later. But as far as biblical imagery goes, nothing says God's realm more than a garden or a vineyard. Think Garden of Eden. It then makes it easier for us, through allegory, to see the landowner as this God figure or divine figure in the parable. And in all of the collective kids' responses last Sunday, we saw this same idea. The focus was always aimed at the landowner as God and the workers as the individuals. So this title just continually points us towards an interpretation focused on understanding the divine in a comparative interpersonal sense between people. For example, you have tension from the idea that God's gift for me was earned, while yours, you didn't work hard enough, yours wasn't earned. And this creates division between people. And Levine points out a major flaw in this idea because Jesus, in the entirety of his message, is way more focused on loving your neighbor, especially in the midst of a broken and unequal system. And if this parable is about God's grace, then God's grace is causing division and tensions between specific individuals. And you may have noticed tonight that the sermon title on the sheet in front of you is not The Workers, but it's The Landowner. So perhaps by shifting our focus to the landowner, it elevates our questions from interpersonal between people to systemic realities and relations. And that's kind of where I'm going to aim tonight. So let's remove the titles and try a different perspective. So first, a brief recap of the parable. It starts with kingdom of heaven is like a landowner, goes out early in the morning to hire workers. And he agrees with them on a typical daily wage, which would be a denarion. 9 a.m., he's back at the marketplace, sees more workers standing around not doing anything, hires them, same pay. Noon and 3 p.m., same thing happens. 5 p.m., he's back at the marketplace, talks to more workers, and he says, "Why are you just standing around?" And they respond, "Because no one has hired us." He brings them back to work as well. Evening comes, probably about an hour later, and the landowner decides to call everyone in from the fields to get paid. So the manager begins to pay them, starting with the last hired at 5, going back to the early risers. And they're all getting the same pay. When the first hired realize this, they get frustrated. But the landowner responds to them, "Friends, I did you no wrong. Didn't I agree to pay you a denarion? Take what belongs to you and go. I want to give to this one who was hired last the same as I give to you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with what belongs to me? Or are you resentful because I'm generous?" And I kept reading this parable over and over again this week, and I just kept writing down questions. And I had a really long list of questions at the end of the week because this is a really weird narrative, especially for us in our business society today, the way we structure business, the way we structure culture, it just doesn't seem to make sense for us. And so I began to engage with it critically. And my main question kept coming back to this character of the landowner. And was he actually being fair? Was his payment system just? Because it didn't seem that way for the way that we would understand business. John Dominic Crossan, author of The Power of Parable, also critiques this view of seeing the landowner only as divine. And maybe the real issue isn't only about what's going on in the vineyard either, especially when so much action occurs in the marketplace, all the dialogue, the interchange between the landowner and the workers to get hired. And Crossan brings up a good point that this question about the landowner's justice can't be the only question. Because if we ask the landowners about the landowner's fairness of pay, then we also have to start questioning his hiring methods and his attitude towards these workers. But then again, if you think about it, is he the only person hiring workers? Or are there just that many workers around and not enough work? It seems like at least this vineyard has a lot going on. They need all hands on deck to gather all the crops. So you would probably assume that other fields are doing well as well. But for some reason, by the end of the day, he's back at the marketplace and there are still people in need of work. And he's frustrated with it. So the landowner asks them, "Why are you still standing around?" And so he wants to be fair, and when they come in, he agrees to pay them a daily wage so that they can go home and feed their families. But that frustrates the other workers because they think they deserve more, even though they agreed on the same thing. Is this getting complicated enough yet? Can you see how the problem isn't totally about the relationship between these workers and this landowner? Crossan points out that this parable is distinguishing personal injustice and systemic injustice, tensions between the working individuals and the tensions between the landowner and the system in which he operates. And without recognizing both and seeing both in this parable, you could be missing the true challenge here. The frustrations that come from both the workers and the owner are because they're both trying to function in a system that isn't working for either party. And I think that in our current state in society, we have a pretty good sense of what a system feels like when it isn't working for anyone. Like these parables, like the coloring sheets in front of you, these issues are not black and white. And it's frustrating when, and they often are, treated this way. We can easily find something like a workers in the vineyard equals God's graces for everyone message from this story, which I'm not saying is a bad thing. It's really a great message. It's a hopeful one. But if we've learned anything from the past few weeks, parables just aren't that simple. In the same way, if we look at problems of inequality today as a binary issue, we'll get the wrong idea about how to approach it. So I saw this online probably in the past week or so, and if any of you watched The Daily Show with Trevor Noah, you might have seen it as well. But he did a really good job of pointing out how quickly and definitively we're quick to simplify issues to like a this or that solution. So check this out. I don't think I'm speaking for only myself when I say that this language gets really frustrating, because I see it all the time. And I'm not going to get into the depths of what this means in our society, but I just want to put it out there. Our system isn't perfect. The ways we communicate with one another are not perfect. And this isn't an attack on one group or the other. I'm merely saying that there needs to be an awareness that if Jesus was more concerned with loving your neighbor, which sure seems to be the case, then we should probably be thinking about whether or not this sort of tension between people is how the system should be working. Thinking about the parable, we can hear the vineyard workers bickering, 9 a.m. vineyard workers matter, and the other vineyard workers saying, all vineyard workers matter, and the landowner defensively arguing that he isn't privileged or that it's not his fault. And at the end of the day, the parable might be less concerned with deciding who's right than it is with calling into question the entire system that creates these tensions. So yeah, system isn't perfect. The next question is always, what do we do now? I don't know. Again, I don't think there is one simple answer. But I think that it starts with something that Ben uncovered last week with the parable of the sower. Secrets create a power dynamic where someone is always in control. But mystery is egalitarian. It preserves the equality of curiosity, the mutuality of the shared pilgrimage. So the call to love your neighbor isn't one that amplifies interpersonal divisions into right and wrong hashtags and accusatory language, but rather that acknowledges how broken things really are and works at figuring out the loving way to work together as diverse individuals with different experiences, to name systemic breakdown and push together for change. And this recognition of the broken system in which we live invites us into other ways of being that aren't polarizing. We can be pro-Black Lives Matter and pro-police, while also saying at the same time that there needs to be change. Support of these two ideas doesn't mean keeping them the way they are, but to move forward in the hope that everyone has a voice and everyone feels protected. This mystery that these parables invite us into is egalitarian. Like the landowner, it invites everybody into a system that's human, that's broken, with the hope that we can work together here and now in love. Amen.